Okay. So we're on chapter 10, the prohibition of Pas Akum. So hopefully other people will join. Bread baked by a non-Jew. So the week before last, before we had our unexpected break, we kind of had that general and long discussion. Were you here for that, Trina? That long discussion that we had the other week?
Yes.
Okay, about just kind of the general discussion of the rabbinic, like why the rabbis did what they did and,
Yes.
and the prohibitions there. Okay, so just 1 second. Show the link here.
Okay, so if there's no code to get in the class, what am I supposed to put on Zoom?
What do you mean?
When I have to like log in, I usually use the same code I do for David's classes on Thursday, the 728 or the
there should be no code for his class either because we set it to like I changed the settings to the meeting because the code is the same. You don't have to put a code because all we do is admit someone into the class.
Okay, because when I tried doing Zoom for both y'all's classes, it asked me for a meeting ID.
Well, the meeting ID is always the same. That's the number.
Okay.
So that's the quote. But that's different than a passcode. So we used to have to ask for a passcode, but we decided, well, just easier just to let somebody in, and then we don't have to tell people two different things. We can just literally give them the number to the meeting. So, all right, but glad you got the book. So hopefully that will make it easier to follow along with me.
Yeah,
and
finally.
have more of a discussion, and hopefully look at those previous chapters. So the purpose of Pas Akum prohibition, the difference between Pas Palter and Pas Bal Habayas, lots of tongue twisters in Judaism. When Pas Palter is permitted, defining the parameters of Pas, Jewish participation in the baking process, bittul regarding Pas Akum, and the taste of Pas Akum, or Pas Akum, sorry. So you'll see this, just kind of an initial thought on the top of my head. When you're here, or if you're in any large Jewish community and you go to the kosher bakery section, you kind of have, just like you have with meat, you kind of have a wide variety of different kinds of bread. It's all obviously baked by a Jew, but you're going to have different levels. And so you're going to have different markings on those packages that you might not normally have, or not, depending on the level. So Pas Akum is one that, like, basically you'll have, that can be like an option, I guess. So you can just get regular OU bread, but if you want to, there's the higher standards, just like you have with meat, which we'll probably get into this. So some questions this is going to address. If one is in the supermarket needs pretzels, is it permissible to buy a kosher non-Jewish brand, or must buy a Jewish brand? So like if you go to your regular, like you probably go to your store and see OU bread, or CRC or whatever. It's technically kosher, but should you buy it? So it'd be interesting to see. I haven't actually read this chapter, so I've only ever kind of based stuff off of what David said, because we try to buy the higher stuff, but the reason behind it I'm not as familiar with is with other aspects, like, cooking meat or dairy together or so forth. So if Pas Palter is permitted, why do some people eat only Pas Israel? I guess that means Pas Palter, like made by a non-Jew. May one buy donuts from a kosher non-Jewish establishment? So like a Dunkin' Donuts, I guess. May one eat a kosher corn muffin baked by a non-Jew? May one bake chicken or fish with kosher breadcrumbs from a non-Jewish company? So lots of, and if I remember correctly from last week, it's a rabbinic prohibition in terms of the bread. There's no actual biblical prohibition, I could be wrong, that I can remember that we covered last week. Saying how much detail. So I'll read the introduction here. The following 2 chapters deal with the issues of Pas Akum, bread baked by a non-Jew, and Bishul Akum, food cooked by a non-Jew. So 2 separate things, 2 different categories, so baking and cooking. One should note that although we use the term Akum, which literally translated Oved Kuvavim Umazalot, a worshiper of stars and constellations, i.e. an idolater, the prohibitions of Pas Akum and Bishul Akum apply equally to any non-Jew, regardless of his belief. Thus, bread baked by or food cooked by a Muslim or even a non-Jew who keeps the 7 Noahide laws are subject to all these rules. So that's interesting and not something I would expect. So they're so strict about it that it even applies to a non-Jew who's not an idolater. I would think. Oh, let's move on. Maybe they'll probably obviously answer it. There is a question whether bread baked by a Jew who publicly desecrates Shabbos is included in the prohibitions of Pas and Bishul Akum. Initially, one should not let a Shabbos desecrator cook his foods even where kosher is not an issue. So even if the person is cooking kosher perfectly fine, they don't keep Shabbos. If the Jew doesn't keep Shabbos, you shouldn't let them cook for you. One should note that whenever we permit eating food prepared by a non-Jew or bread baked by a non-Jew, we are assuming that it has been ascertained, A, that the food is completely free of any non-kosher matter, and that I guess applies for any kosher or any food in general. B, that has been prepared in kosher utensils in a kosher oven. One who has not checked the ingredients of a bread and the manner in which it is prepared may not eat any bread from a non-Jewish or any unreliable Jewish baker. Bakers commonly add non-kosher ingredients, oil, shortening, and flavoring to their bread. Even if the bread itself does not contain any non-kosher additives, the oven may have been used for non-kosher breads, pastries, and cakes. So you still have the issues generally associated with kosher issues, just in general. Let's see. In the past, where countries such as Italy, where one could freely eat breads from non-Jewish bakeries, since it was assumed that these breads did not contain any forbidden ingredients. This is no longer a valid assumption. The food industry today is complex and sophisticated. Flavoring, coloring, and preservatives, which all require rabbinic supervision, are added to most foods. Thus, one cannot eat any bread product without ascertaining beyond a doubt that it is produced under kosher conditions. Even if a baked item is completely kosher, if the bakery is owned by a Jew, one must ascertain that challah was set aside from the dough. So you do have, that is a biblical commandment to separate challah. So if you use a certain amount of, I think it's 10 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's actually less. I think it's 5 pounds. So if you use, it's either 5 or 10 pounds. I don't quite recall. If you use a certain amount of flour and you have that certain weight, you're then obligated to take challah from the dough mixture, and you burn that. And a while back we discussed kind of the different traditions with that. One of the prohibitions enacted by Tananim, the sages who are quoted in the Mishnah more than 2,000 years ago, is prohibition of Pas Akum. Chazal were concerned that eating bread baked by a non-Jew may lead to friendliness and camaraderie, which in turn may lead to close friendship, affection, intimacy, and perhaps ultimately intermarriage. So that's a discussion we had a couple of weeks ago. As in the case in most rabbinic decrees, Chazal did not differentiate between different individual situations. That's why we not even eat bread baked by a married old non-Jew has no children, even though in this case, there's hardly any reasonable possibility of intermarriage. So it's not even like, it's just kind of they treat it more as a general prohibition. So you're not going to it's not like a case-by-case basis kind of thing. So pas parlor and pas bal habayis. Which I'm curious how they define these. When the prohibition of Pas Akum was originally instituted, it was not widely accepted by Kol Israel. Okay, so this is why you have baking is Achum. Pas is like I guess, non-Jewish people. In addition, bread is a simple food upon which people's lives depend, and the prohibition of bread baked by non-Jew caused undue hardship for many Jews. A family that could not bake its own bread and lived in a town without a Jewish baker was left without an important dietary staple. As a result of this difficulty, the custom developed and was eventually sanctioned by Chazal to permit bread baked by a non-Jewish bakery, a palter, if no Jewish baker was available. This bread is called pas palter. So this kind of comes up with a situation of like, so you could make the argument based upon what they just said that if you're in a Jewish community, like we have several bakeries here that are Jewish owned, and even if you go to the general store, you can buy bread that is made by a Jew. So therefore, you can argue that when you are in that, when you have access to it, you should buy that only Jewish bread, meaning bread baked by Jews only. If you're traveling, you kind of have a leniencies. If you have any questions, just say it.
Oh, no, sorry.
So there is a logical difference between bread baked by a private, non-professional, non-Jew and a bread baked by a non-Jewish professional baker. The prohibition of Pas Akum was instituted because of the possibility of closeness or eventual intermarriage. So I'm kind of skipping down here a little bit. So when is Pas Palter permitted? The leniency of Pas Palter is not unconditional. It is governed by strict rules. Sephardic and Ashkenazi customs differ with regard to the circumstances in which we permit Pas Palter. I'm going to guess that Sephardic. Okay. I don't know who's going to be more strict in this. In general, Sephardic tradition is stricter regarding Pas Akum and Bishul Akum. Actually, no, that actually makes sense because we talked about it a few weeks ago about how if you're in a restaurant, you can't have a Sephardic Jew cannot have a non-Jew cook for him, no matter what. It actually has to be a Jew. I've always wanted to see how a Sephardic Jew handles that situation. Like, I guess they go into if you're going into an Ashkenazi owned kosher restaurant, you gotta be like, where's your Jew? I need him to cook for me. like, how would that practically work? But I've never seen that happen. So it goes in here to the different the different customs of Sephardic and Ashkenazi custom. So according to Sephardic tradition, one may not eat pas palter if pas Israel bread baked by non-Jew can be found within one mil. That's 2,000 cubits. So that's kind of the argument I was making, which I'd be comfortable with. Like, if you're obviously in a Jewish community and you have easy access to Jewish bread, why not? You're supporting your community. And if you're traveling and you don't have access to it, okay. One who is traveling may not eat pas palter if pas Israel is available within 4 mil. So they're even more strict. They're like, we're going to make it. And I'm not sure how this deals with driving and like modern technology. So I don't know in terms of transportation. I'm not sure how practically, like, was formed when people walked and had horses and stuff. So I'm not exactly sure how they would calculate it now. In the direction he's traveling, or 1 mil in the opposite direction or side direction. Ashkenazi custom tradition is more lenient. So there is advantages to following Ashkenazi tradition, I guess. Ashkenazi Jews may eat pas palter even if pas Israel is available. However, some authorities rule that even Ashkenazi Jews should not follow this lenient custom. Again, that makes sense to me anyway. Even Sephardic tradition permits eating pas palter in one of the following conditions. Pas palter is tastier than pas Israel. Ooh, insult to the baker. The type of bread that one wants is not available in pas Israel. The pas Israel is significantly more expensive than the pas palter. One should consult a Rav. So if you have a $10 loaf of pas Israel bread, and then you have a $5 loaf of the same bread, that's not, what do you do? Especially with inflation. I cannot believe I say that because I have been literally shocked at the price of food lately. Oh, any questions?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, so there are section D here. So there are times during the year where it's much stricter. So between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's even Ashkenazi Jews should eat only Pas Israel. Again, if it's not available, there's a leniency there. And when traveling, this condition does not apply, or these rules apply to cakes, cookies, crackers, pretzels as well, as will be explained in section B. And the stricter Ashkenazic custom, although general Ashkenazic custom is more lenient, Ashkenazi Jews in many sections of Europe adopted the custom to refrain from eating pas palter. So it's kind of like you can accept upon yourself a more stringent standard, I guess, which I guess is what David and I have done. Which we generally, I don't even think about it anymore. I actually liked the Pas Israel bread better, actually. I think because it's not like, you don't know how long that other bread has been sitting on the shelf in that general bread section, but you know that in the bakery it's fresh every day. In addition, Kabbalistic sources maintain that one should avoid eating pas palter. For this reason, many, especially in the Messianic tradition, do not eat pas palter. Those who follow this custom refrain from eating pas palter, even if it is tastier than pas Israel, and even if pas Israel is not as available within a mill. So apparently, you kind of have some flexibility there. In relation to the discussion we had the other day, in terms of believers and that kind of thing, I'm not sure. Kind of brings question because it's saying even if it's not, the halacha says even if that person is not an idolater, because they don't consider Muslims idolaters, which is interesting because they worship only one God. They consider Christians as worshiping three. So what would be kind of the solution for a Messianic community then, in terms of this halacha? Do you have any kind of wanting your thoughts on it off the top of your head? Like if you have Jews and you have non-Jews in a Messianic community, how would you deal with the problem of Pas Israel or not?
I saw like one note, if like Pas Israel is more expensive, you have to contact a Rav to see what your options are for that. But I don't know, I'd rather pay the extra amount of money to make sure I'm eating the proper thing to eat something that may not be okay.
So what should you make it a standard? Like if you know you're going to have Jews, like this is under the presumption that you're part of an observant community, because obviously the non-observant Messianic community doesn't give a crap.
Yeah.
Generally, and they don't even know these rules. So would it just kind of be like, okay, we're just going to make it a general rule that only the Jews in the community can bake bread for it? Like if you're having a Shabbos meal, for example, only a Jew can bring the bread if they bake it in their house? Or should it be, and then like make the Gentiles buy it if they don't want to bake it, or since they can't bake it for a Jew, should you have them bring it from the stores, Pas Israel? Like those are kind of like the practical, that's the simplest kind of scenario. Like that would be the most common scenario.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to say. It's probably better for having like a Jewish person make it, so you're just kind of safe and above the board, like across the board. I mean, someone can buy it from the store, but if you don't know who might be baking it, then that can cause a problem too. Because
like here, for example, if you go to the Jewel up the street, well, there's actually to be absolutely sure, you can just go to the bakery that's literally down the block, which is a kosher bakery, and buy it from that. But in the general store, half the store is kosher. They actually have a kosher bakery, and it says Pas Israel right on the back. So it's not difficult.
We don't have that here.
Well, you're not here yet. I hope you come soon. Not when we're traveling to Florida, though. David was like, watch them come to Chicago when we're in Florida, because we're leaving a week from tomorrow, for 2 weeks. So, but it doesn't sound like you'll be heading up till March, right?
Yeah, possibly. We got hopefully some tax money coming soon too. So once that hits,
that should help.
Yeah, like.
Oh, good. So you got yours done too. That's good.
Yeah, all three of us do, but our stuff is delayed because I guess some of the kids' refunds are bigger. So the IRS is taking their time coming through everything because apparently they don't like letting go of that much cash. So We'll see.
Well, that's a different topic.
They like when you
So-
pay them a lot. They just don't give them a lot back.
Right. We fortunately found a guy who apparently knows what he's doing, because we've never had an issue, thankfully. So anyway, so you would have, like, living here, it would be quite easy for a non-Jewish person who's participating to if a Jew in the community couldn't bake it, you would just have them buy it from the store. In a situation like if you were in Corpus Christi, like you are, or other area of the country that doesn't necessarily, because not a lot, it's only in the large, like we're the third largest Jewish community in the state, so you're of course going to have it, but maybe in some of the smaller Jewish communities you're not. So then you might be able to, I guess it kind of is a case by case depending on where the community is. Okay, so here's the summary. So one shopping in a supermarket is often faced with the choice of buying either a non-Jewish brand of bread, cookies or crackers or pretzels, or a Jewish bread. Often the Jewish bread is not as fresh as the non-Jewish bread, or is not as tasty. Nevertheless, there is good reason for even an Ashkenazic Jew to follow stricter tradition. However, one who wishes may be lenient and eat Pas Israel if it is better tasting or is better quality than the Pas Israel brand, or if there's subsequent difference in price, a substantial difference in price, and there's sufficient with one that is sufficient with regards to one's budget. So yeah, Judaism does take your money very seriously. So if it doesn't want you to go broke because of a loaf of bread, literally. So if it's going to cause you financial hardship, you can be lenient in that situation. In addition, if the type of bread that one's family likes to eat is not available in Jewish bread, one may purchase the non-Jewish brand. So this doesn't have to do specifically with bread, but we have more often than not had a situation a few times where we weren't able to find Chalav Israel milk, because sometimes there's these weird shortages of Chalav Israel milk and not the other. So you always have this kind of like, okay, do we not have milk in our house with 3 children, and wait for the Chalav Israel a couple of days, or do we buy the OUD stam milk? So we do have that question. So you would have the same thing with the bread. Okay, like if it's not available, do we go ahead and buy the regular, not kosher, but not as strict bread, I guess. Though Palter is a baker, Pas Palter regarding the halachas of Pas Akum, this is under number 2, is defined as bread that was baked with the intention to be sold. Thus, the bread of a non-Jewish housewife who bakes bread to sell at a street fair is considered Pas Palter, even though it was not baked by a baker. So it doesn't matter whether it comes from a house or from a professional. Okay, let's see. Conversely, if a non-Jewish baker baked bread specifically for his family, a special recipe that they enjoy is considered regular prohibited Pas Akum, since it was not baked to sell. Accordingly, in these cases, one may eat the housewife's bread, but not the baker's. So if you can't, this is really sad because my dad makes really good bread. I can't eat my own parents' bread because I'm a convert. Because it's like, if they were making it to sell it, I could maybe justify it. Like, oh, I'll buy it from, like, I'd have to buy it from my own parents, which is funny. Like if I knew it was all kosher ingredients and whatnot. Though probably for them it's not a kosher oven, so it's that kind of kills the idea. But hypothetically, I could buy it from them. But if they're only making it from themselves, I can't eat it. And my dad is such a good cook. Ugh, that's probably my hardest thing about keeping kosher, is not being able to eat at my parents' house because it's so good. The definition of Pas Palter depends on the actual baking of the bread, not whether it is eventually sold or given as a gift. Thus, if a non-Jewish purchases bread from a baker and gives it to it as a gift to a Jew, the Jew may eat the bread. We actually had this situation come up on our trip this summer. We had a host give us bread, which we couldn't eat anyway because I think it had walnuts or something in it, so we couldn't have it because of our son. But it did come up. but apparently halakhically we could eat it because they gave it as a gift. So if a non-Jew gives, so I guess that might be a way a little bit more lenient. Conversely, if a non-Jewish wife baked bread for his own family and decides to sell it, instead a Jew may not eat the bread. So there's a little bit of depends on the situation. So it sounds like a non-Jew can give the Jew a gift. So if a non-Jew comes over for Shabbos and gives you the gift of their bread, you could maybe eat it. So that might be a way around it. Oh my gosh, I forgot to make challah. I thought I had more in the freezer. Oh, here you go. Here's a gift or something. Oh, that actually has really big relevance. I'm just thinking about it. Because sometimes we stay at people's houses like for Shabbos and stuff, and they're not Jewish, but they've baked challah. Presumably the challah is kosher because they're not eating. A lot of the Messianic families that we've stayed with don't keep pork or shellfish or anything like that. They're not necessarily keeping a kosher kitchen, but like presumably they're not having anything tray from their oven. So that actually does come up in a practical sense sometimes for us. Like, okay, do we eat the bread or not? So in that case, like if they give it to us as a gift, here's a gift of challah, and you're sure it's kosher in terms of how they made it, I could see that could be a leniency you could take. Then it has a whole list. I'm not going to go through the practical summary since you read all the details. And it has a whole list of different what's considered pas, cakes, pies, knish. What kind of, this is your reference guide, I guess. And what is so here was the question. Let's see. So bagels, so cakes, because of the ratio, I guess the laws apply. Pies and knish are subject because they're made of flour. Okay, so this is interesting. So on page 274, you have potato knish. Like the little they make in Israel.
Oh yeah, those are good. I had those in New York a lot.
Yeah, they're very good. Apparently, you can't have a non-Jew cook those because it's not only because you have the bread part of it, but then you have the cooking part of it. So like you're simultaneously cooking and baking at the same time. So you can't have a non-Jew cook that for you. Let's see. Same thing with meat pies. The meat is bishul acham, and the crust, which is sort of gravy from the meat, is prohibited as well. So if you're mixing bishul acham and pas acham, which I didn't even think about, it's prohibited. Fruit pies, let's see, is permitted. If the you can eat, presumably you can eat the raw filling. Pie crust is subject to the laws. Okay, crackers are subject to the laws. Bagels, pancakes, and blintzes. They apparently might be prohibited. So it kind of depends, I guess. Yeah, it depends on how they're cooked. Okay, so donuts are not pas. They're not considered baked because they're actually fried. So considered bishul acham. But of course, there's a question mark on that. So I guess some people are more lenient with donuts. So you can have your kosher Dunkin' Donuts donuts. David will be happy to hear that. Let's see. So interesting. Corn muffins are exempt from bishul acham, even though they're made because they're made out of cornbread. Let's see. So if you buy raw pasta or macaroni, it's not either one, pas or bishul, and because it's not normally eaten. Though my son has tried, didn't work out well for him. Trying to chew the thing. Breakfast cereals. Okay. So that's kind of a different. They're actually subject to the rules of Bishul Achum, not Pas Akum. Yeah, because we have the Hamusha, the Jewish made like Cheerios and things. So apparently I need to buy those at the store rather than like Cheerios. I need to buy the Jewish brand. So it's like it's better to have the stricter version of it. Let's see. All right, the parameters of it gets more complicated from here. The parameters of this is section 3 of the Pas Akum prohibition. So there are 3 sufficient acts involved in the baking process, significant acts involved in the baking process: kindling the fire, placing the bread in the oven, and stoking the coals. That was in previous times before modern stuff. For instance, if non-Jew kindle a fire, place the bread into the oven, and Jew merely stoke the coals, the bread is Pas Israel. So that's why in Ashkenazi, they always light the fire. So that's the main thing for them. Traditional means by which a Jew may share the baking process of a coal oven. A Jew may throw a piece of wood, regardless of its size, into the fire, or use its bellows. If a Jew does either of these things, the bread is Pas Israel. So they don't actually have to be the only one cooking it. Rather, when he wishes to prevent bread from becoming Pas Akum, should initially do one of the 3 more significant acts: kindling the oven, placing the bread into the oven, or stoking the coals. Nowadays, one should somewhat raise the heat of the oven. So that's why in terms of like restaurants in general, you'll have a Jew light all the fires. A non-Jew is not allowed to do that because it's, I guess, a significant act. Even if a Jew is not involved in the beginning of the baking process and the bread in the oven is already baked, it may yet be saved. I love how this is phrased. It may yet be saved from the Pas Akum prohibition if a Jew becomes involved in the continuation of the baking and improves the bread's quality and makes it more edible for the average person. I like that phraseology. That's funny. It's in part. That's in number 2. However, if the subsequent baking does not improve the bread's quality, one merely warms the bread is insufficient and cannot remove the Pas Akum prohibition. Thus, if a non-Jew bakes bread to the degree that it could be considered baked, but at the point a Jew stoked the coals and the bread continues baking and improves, its crust becomes crispier to a degree that it becomes tastier, more edible to most people. The bread is not Pas Akum. So it seems very technical. I'm glad I'm not the professional baking business. Though I sold it for a time. So you can't reverse the prohibition. You can't be like, well, it's Pas Akum, but I'm gonna like reverse it. You can't do that. Once it's Pas Akum, it's Pas Akum. So for example, one who makes breaded chicken or breaded fish should not use pas balls or crumbs if Pas Israel is readily available. So bittul regarding Pas Akum, most prohibited foods lose their prohibition when they are lost in a mixture of permitted foods. This is called bittul, nullification. So 60 to 1. However, Pas Akum is more lenient and is not directly based upon a biblical prohibition. It's merely rabbinical. Therefore, when Pas Akum falls into permitted food, it is nullified in merely a majority of permitted food. So even if you had 3/4 of something and then 1/4 of the bread, apparently it becomes permitted. I could just mix a bunch of loaves together. So if you had a problem, I don't know, you probably couldn't do it intentionally, but I'm just thinking you had a bunch of a non-Jew who baked challah and a Jew who baked challah, and you mix them together, you can't tell the difference. So, well, okay. Whoops. But if you can tell the difference between the loaves, then that doesn't work. Let's see. Browsing through here. Pas Akum is a lot more lenient. It cannot pass as prohibited taste to other foods because it's dry. Like you have bread. It's bread. You're not. If I take a non-Jewish made bagel to a Jewish made bagel, sounds weird. It's not going to pass this taste, even if it's hot. It's dry. Thus, an oven or a loaf pan in which the pas akum is baked may be used for other foods. So, practical summary: if a Jew contributed to the baking process by turning on the oven and placing the bread in the oven, or raising the oven's temperature, even after a non-Jew turned on the oven and placed the loaves inside, the bread is considered pas Israel. So it goes on to talk about if the bread can be sufficiently changed by the Jew, you can cancel out the pas akum, but you can't do it post facto. You should try not to use pas palter, breadcrumbs and so forth if pas Israel is available, and pas akum is generally more lenient with cooking and touching, and you're not going to make your challah, your Jewish challah, non-kosher by touching the other bread. So that's the end of that chapter. So yeah, any kind of final comments in terms of the practical application for the community we're trying to start?
Well, it'll be helpful when we're up there because I can not have to worry about a lot of things being kosher, non-kosher, how they're made, because you said you have all those markets up there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here I've seen a few things with the OU symbol, but there's not much else besides that. So
Right. Well, and that, so when we're here, we generally we're more strict in general, because we're here, right? So it's a lot easier. I can get challah Israel milk. I can get pasta Israel bread very easily. But when I go to my parents who live in North Carolina, it's a tiny, tiny Jewish community, and I probably can't get that. So I can get my OUD milk, and I can get, same thing with meat. Like everything has its level. So here I can get super, 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 like, the most kosher inspected meat ever. But when we're down, maybe I can in Miami, but maybe in other places in Florida, when we go down there, I won't be able to get the high level stuff I want.
yeah, you go to Boca, there's all kinds of kosher stuff in Boca. You shouldn't have
Yeah.
a problem finding stuff there. It's mostly
Okay.
like a Jewish community there.
Yeah. Where's that?
Boca Raton, it's in Florida.
Okay.
It's kind of where closer to Palm Beach is in the far southern side, like heading towards Miami.
Okay.
So like I've heard some of my friends in New York who are Jewish refer to that as Jew heaven.
Well, they
So.
should come to Chicago. It's
Yeah, right.
probably, equivalent, because we have within a mile of our house, so you can go one direction and go to one bakery, which is okay. I don't like it that much, so I'd rather go the mile and a half the other direction and go to another bakery. But those bakeries actually deliver to the big store. So you'll see, there's one that's called okay, there's Tel Aviv Bakery, which I don't like particularly, but then there's North Shore Bakery, which is phenomenal, which is weird because it's like literally like a few streets away from each other, like a mile. Now you have a mile over here and a mile over here. We just happen to be closer to the not so great one. But they sell a lot of their products to Jewel, which is the big market, general market. And we're actually going to start going more towards the smaller Jewish markets because their prices are not going crazy like the big market, which is interesting. Like it's not, the inflation doesn't seem to be hitting as hard there. So I'm going to stop this.